Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi Sanae won an unprecedented victory in the 2026 election, securing her future as the country's leader and crushing her opponents. So how exactly did it play out, and how might it shape Japan's politics and the country as a whole moving forward? Takaichi chose to hold the election just months after she came into office, and was enjoying the kind of popularity that a Japanese leader hasn't seen for years. The calculation for her was probably pretty simple. She was extremely popular at the time, but couldn't know how long that would last. So if she held an election immediately, she could maximize her chances of victory and pick up seats in parliament. She was quickly criticized for this because she already had a functioning, if extremely slim, majority that put her into office, and the last election was only a little more than a year ago. Plus, the whole thing cost about 80 billion yen or $500 million. But in the end, those criticisms apparently ended up meaning very little to voters, because they delivered her and her party, the Liberal Democratic Party, the largest election victory in modern Japanese history. Before the election, the LDP had just 198 seats in the lower house of the Diet, the main chamber of Japan's parliament. While it was still enough to give the LDP a majority when combined with its allies, 198 MPs was close to the low point for the party, second only to 2009 when it lost the Prime Minister's office altogether. In this election though, the party succeeded in picking up 125 seats, bringing its total to 316, which is both a two-thirds majority and the largest ever held by a single party. It's safe to say that credit for this victory lies with the Prime Minister herself. Not only has she remained quite popular since coming into office, but members of her party heavily leaned into her persona, with many candidates using her likeness in campaign materials and touting their personal connections to her. Holding that hard to the coattails of the leader is something of a departure for Japanese politics, where elections are generally seen as more of a competition between parties. But it was actually Takaichi's goal from the start to make the race about herself. She framed the election as a referendum on her leadership and a battle between party leaders, particularly between herself and Noda Yoshihiko, a former prime minister and the then leader of the Centrist Reform Alliance, the largest opposition party. Without any major accomplishments in Takaichi's short time in office, and policy positions that don't always pull favorably, the Prime Minister and her party benefited from making the election a popularity contest, successfully pushing the idea that she's working hard and is different from politicians, and that if she can only be given the right tools, she can improve the country in the long run. The Liberal Democratic Party's gains come at the expense of many groups in Japan's parliament, but none more than the main opposition party, the Centrist Reform Alliance, or CRA. The CRA was led by former Prime Minister Noda, and was hastily established in the weeks leading up to the election through a union of the large Constitutional Democratic Party, Japan's main liberal institution up to that point, and Komeito, a much smaller but nevertheless influential group that used to be aligned with the LDP before splitting off due to its opposition to Takaichi. The new party hoped to be competitive in the race against the LDP by combining the voting bases of its predecessors, but also by essentially pivoting to the center, as its name implies, and rejecting liberalism and its center-left past. But of course, as we now know, the CRA's first election ended in complete disaster for the party. Before the election was held, the CRA had 172 seats, and was within striking distance of the Prime Minister's office. But it ended up losing 123, almost exactly the amount the LDP gained, bringing its total to just 49. Noda and his co-leader, Saito Tetsuo, both resigned, and the once powerful party now faces tough questions over how to even start rebuilding its influence and authority. There are a lot of reasons for the CRA's defeat: the unpopularity of the party leadership, the hasty formation, hostility between members of the former constituent parties, and the unavoidable reality of Takaichi's raw popularity. But the fact that the party chose to pivot to the center in a parliament already dominated by centrist and right-wing parties stands out. While the CRA may still retain many of its liberal roots and could always swing back that way, Japan's parliament now lacks any major liberal or left-wing parties, and there are now fewer ideas that differentiate the narrow spectrum of perspectives among the parties that dominate the ranks of the opposition. So what does this mean for Japanese politics and the country in general moving forward? For one thing, it means that we've entered a new period of LDP domination. After years of scandals, poor election results, and a revolving door of prime ministers, many had come to see the Liberal Democratic Party's days as numbered. But this election completely reverses that trend, elevating the party to its most powerful position in its 7 decades of dominating Japanese politics. The LDP fended off not only centrist opponents, but also opponents to the party's right, despite already being right-wing conservative itself, especially under Takaichi. The rise of the far-right anti-immigrant party Sanseito, in particular, was blunted. Having only become prominent just within the last few years, Sanseito made a name for itself by calling for hard limits on immigration, railing against LGBT rights and gender equality, and advocating for nationalist reforms to Japan's constitution. While the young party benefited from the LDP's decline and lured many voters away from its right wing, Takaichi's popularity as a somewhat hardline conservative seemingly succeeded in pulling many of those same voters back. While Sanseito still managed to increase its parliamentary foothold from 3 seats to 15, that's a far cry from the nearly 200 candidates it fielded. And the 4.2 million votes it received this time around is a steep drop-off from the 7.4 million it garnered in the less consequential upper house elections just last summer. So for now, the opposition as it existed before the election is no more. And Takaichi and the LDP face essentially no challengers or impediments to their power. Takaichi will now be free to pursue many of her signature policies and pet projects, including tax cuts and stimulus spending, expansion of the military, and hawkish foreign policy, as well as deeper reforms like constitutionally restructuring Japan's armed forces, imposing a tighter and more selective immigration system, and shifting Japan's green transition away from solar and toward nuclear power. But perhaps the biggest outcome of the 2026 lower house election is that it could very well come to represent the beginning of a new era in Japan. More than anyone since Abe Shinzo, Takaichi has firmly established herself at the top of Japan's political hierarchy, gaining a tight grip over the LDP and intertwining the success of the party with her personal fortunes. Not only has she likely secured her place for the long run, I think it's safe to say that we've entered the Takaichi era.
Yeah.